Ethan had always preferred the quiet life. Living alone in a small cabin deep in the woods, he spent most of his days fixing old cars and avoiding people. The forest around him was thick with towering trees, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. It was peaceful here, far away from the noise and chaos of the city. He liked it that way. But on this particular evening, something unusual happened, something that would change his life forever. It started with a sound. At first, Ethan thought it was thunder, but the noise was sharper, more mechanical. A loud crash echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable crackle of splintering wood. Curious, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air smelled strange, metallic almost, and there was an eerie glow coming from somewhere beyond the tree line. Against his better judgment, Ethan decided to investigate as he moved deeper into the woods. The ground beneath his boots grew uneven, littered with broken branches and patches of scorched earth. Whatever had caused the commotion had left a trail of destruction in its wake. Finally, he reached the source, a massive crater surrounded by shattered trees. In the center of the crater lay what looked like the remains of some kind of spacecraft. Its sleek, black surface shimmered faintly, even in the dim light, and parts of it were still smoldering. Ethan had never seen anything like it before, but the ship wasn't empty. Near the wreckage, hunched over and barely conscious, was a figure unlike any human he'd ever encountered. Her skin glowed faintly, pulsating with soft, shifting colors. Her eyes, wide and frightened, locked onto Ethan as he approached cautiously. She wore tattered clothing made of materials he couldn't identify, and strange symbols etched into her arms seemed to emit a faint light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she collapsed, her body too weak to hold itself upright. Ethan hesitated. He didn't know who or what she was, but leaving her there felt wrong. After a few seconds of deliberation, he knelt beside her and gently lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, almost fragile. Carrying her back to the cabin, he couldn't help but wonder what she was doing here and where she had come from. His mind raced with questions, but for now, all that mattered was getting her inside. Back at the cabin, Ethan laid her down on the couch and covered her with a blanket. He fetched a bowl of water and some clean cloths to tend to her. Wounds. There weren't many, just a few cuts and scrapes, but she looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept or eaten in days. Her breathing was shallow, and every so often, she muttered words in a language he didn't understand. Despite her alien appearance, there was something undeniably human about her vulnerability. Ethan found himself feeling protective, though. He couldn't explain why hours passed before she finally stirred. Her glowing eyes fluttered open, and she stared up at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. When she tried to speak, her voice was weak, barely audible. "Help, please," she whispered in broken English. Ethan froze, unsure how to respond. He nodded slowly, trying to convey reassurance. "You're safe," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. She closed her eyes again, drifting back into unconsciousness. The next morning, Ethan woke early to find her sitting up on the couch, looking around the room with cautious curiosity. She noticed him standing in the doorway and flinched slightly, but then relaxed when she saw the concern in his expression. "Who are you?" she asked haltingly, her accent heavy but understandable. "My name's Ethan," he replied, stepping closer. "I found you last night near a crash." "Sight." She nodded slowly, as if piecing together fragments of memory. "Zenara," she said after a pause. "My name is Zenara." Ethan repeated the name silently to himself. It sounded foreign, otherworldly, just like her. "Where are you from?" he asked carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. Zenara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Far away," she murmured. "Not here." She glanced toward the window, her expression darkening. "They chase me. Monsters." Ethan frowned. "Monsters?" She nodded vigorously, her glowing eyes widening. "Vorthik, they hunt me." I must hide. Ethan didn't know what to make of her story. Was she delirious, hallucinating? Or was she telling the truth? Before he could ask more questions, a sudden noise outside caught both their attention. It was distant but unmistakable, the low hum of engines cutting through the stillness of the forest. Zanara stiffened, her entire body tensing. "They're here," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and peered out the window. At first, he saw nothing but shadows moving among the trees. Then something emerged from the darkness, a creature unlike anything he'd ever imagined. Its body was a grotesque blend of metal and flesh, with jagged limbs and glowing red eyes. It moved with unnatural speed, scanning the area methodically. Behind it, two more appeared, spreading out in search of something or someone. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He turned back to Zanara, who was already on her feet, clutching the edge of the couch for support. "We need to go," she urged, her voice trembling. Now, Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her he'd be safer staying put, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She knew these creatures, whatever they were, and she was terrified of them. That was enough for him. Grabbing a backpack, he stuffed it with supplies, food, water, a first aid kit, and motioned for her to follow him. Together, they slipped out the back door and into the woods, moving as quietly as possible. The night was cold, and the forest seemed alive with unseen dangers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made Ethan jump. Zanara kept close behind him, her breathing shallow but steady. They didn't stop until they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow stream. Hiding behind a cluster of boulders, they waited, listening for signs of pursuit. Minutes stretched into hours, but the creatures didn't appear. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and Zanara sank to the ground, her head resting against the cool stone. Ethan sat beside her, his thoughts racing. Who or what was she? And what exactly had he gotten himself into? One thing was certain, his quiet, predictable life was over. Whether he liked it or not, he was now part of something much bigger and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The sun rose slowly over the forest, casting long shadows across the rocky outcrop where Ethan and Zanara had spent the night. The air was crisp, and the sounds of birds chirping filled the silence. Ethan stirred first, his body stiff from sleeping. On the hard ground, he glanced at Zanara, who was still asleep, her glowing skin dimmed to a faint shimmer in the morning light. For a moment, he allowed himself to study her face. Her features were delicate, almost fragile, but there was a strength in her expression that hinted at resilience. He wondered again who she really was and what had brought her here. Zanara woke. Soon after, her eyes fluttering open as she adjusted to the daylight. She looked around cautiously, her gaze lingering on the trees surrounding them. When she noticed Ethan watching her, she offered a small, hesitant smile. "Safe?" she asked. Quietly, her voice still weak but clearer than it had been the night before. "For now," Ethan replied, nodding toward the stream below. "We can stay hidden here for a while, but we need to figure out our next move." Zanara's expression grew serious. "Vorthik will search," she said, her tone heavy with worry. "They do not stop," Ethan frowned. "Who are they? Why? Are they chasing you?" She hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke, her words slow and deliberate. "Vorthik, they are hunters. Machines and flesh combined. They destroy everything. My people, we fought them, but they are too strong." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused to steady herself. "I have something they want. Information. If they catch me, they will take it." Ethan's mind raced. Information? What kind of information could be so valuable that these creatures would go to such lengths to retrieve it? He opened his mouth to ask more, but Zanara continued before he could speak. "You must help me," she said, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "I cannot fight them alone." Ethan felt a pang of doubt. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even Brave. He was just a mechanic who liked fixing things and avoiding trouble. But looking at Zanara, the fear in her eyes, the determination in her voice, he realized he couldn't turn away. She needed him, whether he liked it or not. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help. But you're going to have to tell me everything." Over the next few hours, Zanara shared what she could about her world and the Vorthic. She described her homeworld, a place of vast crystalline structures and skies painted in colors humans couldn't imagine. She spoke of her people, who had once thrived until the Vorthic attacked, driven by a relentless hunger for conquest. And she explained that she had stolen critical data from the Vorthica, blueprint for disabling their central hive mind network. It was this information that made her a target. As she talked, Ethan listened intently, piecing together the enormity of the situation. These creatures weren't just dangerous, they were relentless. If they caught Zanara, it wouldn't just mean her death. It could mean the end of any hope for stopping them. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders, but he pushed the feeling aside. There was no time for fear. Not now. By midday, they decided to move. Staying in one place for too long was risky, especially with the Vortex still searching. Ethan led the way, choosing paths that kept them concealed beneath the thick canopy of trees. Zanara followed closely, her movements cautious but steady. She seemed to know the forest better than he did, pointing out areas where the underbrush was thickest or where the ground was softest for muffling their footsteps. At one point, they stopped to rest near a cluster of boulders. Ethan handed Zanara a piece of dried fruit from his backpack, which she accepted gratefully. As they ate, Ethan found himself studying her again. There was something about her presence that was both alien and strangely familiar. Despite her otherworldly appearance, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded him of someone he couldn't quite place. "Why me?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why did you trust me enough to let me help you?" Zanara tilted her head, considering the question. "You found me when I was weak," she said simply. "You could have left me, but you didn't. That is rare, even among my people." Ethan chuckled dryly. "You don't know me very well yet." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps not, but I know kindness when I see it." The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, a low, mechanical hum that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. Zanara froze, her glowing eyes darting toward the source of the noise. "They're close," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Ethan nodded grimly. "Let's keep moving." They pressed on, weaving through the forest as quickly and quietly as possible. The hum grew louder, accompanied by the occasional rustle of leaves and snapping of twigs. The Vorthic were getting closer, and Ethan could feel the tension mounting with each passing second. His heart pounded in his chest, and his palms grew slick with sweat. He gripped the flashlight tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. Finally, they reached a clearing surrounded by dense bush. Ethan motioned for Zanara to crouch behind a fallen log while he scanned the area for signs of danger. Just as he turned back to signal her, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. One of the Vorthic emerged, its jagged limbs glinting in the sunlight. Its red eyes scanned the area methodically, pausing briefly on the log where Zanara hid. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small multi-tool. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it toward a nearby tree, creating a sharp metallic clang. The Vorthic's head snapped toward the noise, and it lunged forward, its claws slicing through the air. "Now!" Ethan hissed, grabbing Zanara's arm and pulling her to her feet. They sprinted in the opposite direction, dodging trees and leaping over roots as the creature gave chase. Behind them, the forest erupted with the sound of snapping branches and growling metal. Ethan's legs burned with exertion, but he forced himself to keep running. Zanara matched his pace, her glowing form a blur beside him. They ducked into a narrow ravine, using the steep walls to shield themselves from view. The Vorthic roared in frustration, its massive frame unable to navigate the tight space. After several tense minutes, the sound of its movements faded into the distance. Breathing heavily, Ethan leaned against the ravine wall, his chest heaving. Zanara sank to the ground, her hands trembling as she clutched her knees. "That was too close," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, we need a better plan." For the rest of the day, they focused on finding a safer location. Ethan suggested heading toward an abandoned cabin he'd once explored years ago, deep in the heart of the forest. It was isolated and unlikely to attract attention, making it an ideal hiding spot. Zanara agreed, though her exhaustion was evident. In every step she took, when they finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The structure was old and weathered, its wooden walls sagging slightly under the weight of time. Inside, it was dusty, but intact, with a small fireplace and a few pieces of furniture scattered about. Ethan set about reinforcing the door and windows while Zanara rested on a rickety chair, her glowing skin dimming further as fatigue overtook her as night fell. Ethan built a fire in the hearth, its warmth filling the room. He sat across from Zanara, watching the flames dance in her reflective eyes. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, more to reassure himself than her. "We'll find a way to stop them." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Ethan and Zanara worked tirelessly to fortify the abandoned cabin, turning it into a makeshift stronghold. They blocked the windows with wooden planks and reinforced the door with scraps of metal. Ethan had scavenged from an old shed nearby. Inside, they cleared away cobwebs and dust, making the space as livable as possible. Ethan even managed to rig up a rudimentary alarm system using fishing wire and tin cans, creating a warning mechanism in case the vortex approached. As they worked, they began to share more about their lives. Zanara spoke of her homeworld, describing its vast crystalline cities that sparkled like jewels under alien skies. She told Ethan about her family, a mother who had taught her the art of energy manipulation, and a younger brother who had always looked up to her. Her voice softened when she talked about them, and Ethan could see the pain in her eyes. He didn't press her for details, but he guessed that she hadn't seen them in a long time. In return, Ethan shared stories about his own life. He told her about growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, and how he'd learned to fix cars by watching his father work in their garage. He spoke of his love for solitude and how he'd moved to the forest to escape the noise and complications of modern life. Zanara listened intently, asking questions about things she didn't understand, like why humans drove vehicles instead of walking everywhere, or what television was. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their shared sense of loss. Both had been separated from the people and places they loved, though for very different reasons. This bond deepened their connection, and Ethan began to feel a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, his skills weren't just about fixing machines, they were about keeping someone alive. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Zanara demonstrated one of her abilities. Holding out her hand, she focused intently, and a small orb of light appeared above her palm. It pulsed gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. Ethan watched in awe, unable to look away. "That's incredible," he said finally, breaking the silence. "How do you do that?" "It is part of who I am," Zanara replied, her voice calm. "My people can manipulate energy. It is natural." Ethan shook his head, still marveling at the sight. "If I tried that, I'd probably end up blowing myself up." Zanara laughed softly, the sound musical and unexpected. "You would not be the first human to attempt such a thing," she teased. "But perhaps it is better you stick to repairing engines." Ethan grinned, feeling a warmth spread through him. These moments of levity were rare but precious, offering a brief respite from the constant tension. Yet, no matter how comfortable they became with each other, the reality of their situation remained ever present. The Vorthik were still out there, hunting relentlessly. And Zanara's stolen data was their only hope of stopping them. On the fourth day, Ethan decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "We can't stay here forever," he said, as they ate a simple meal of canned beans and crackers. "Eventually, they'll find us. We need a plan." Zanara nodded, her expression serious. "I agree, but we cannot act without preparation. The data I carry is encrypted. To use it, we must access my wrist device." She held up her arm, showing him the sleek black band wrapped around her wrist. It was sleek and futuristic, with faintly glowing symbols etched into its surface. Ethan examined it closely, running his fingers over the smooth material. "What does it do?" he asked. "It stores the information I stole from the Vorthik," Zanara explained. "But it requires specific tools to decode." "Tools I do not have," Ethan frowned. "So what?" "We need to find some kind of tech lab or something." "Not exactly," Zanara replied. "There is a military base not far from here, an old one. It may have the equipment we need." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A military base? You sure about that?" "Those places are usually crawling with security." "It has been abandoned for years," Zanara assured him. "But it is our best chance." The idea of venturing into an abandoned military base made Ethan uneasy, but he knew they didn't have many options. If they wanted to stop the Vorthik, they needed to take risks. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go. But we'll need supplies and a way to defend ourselves." Over the next 2 days, they prepared for the journey. Ethan scavenged weapons from the shed, including a rusted hunting knife and a baseball bat he reinforced with nails. He also packed extra food, water, and medical supplies, knowing they might be gone for days. Zanara spent her time practicing her energy manipulation, honing her ability to create bursts of light and heat. Though she wasn't a fighter by nature, she was determined to contribute however she could. On the morning of their departure, the air was thick with anticipation. Ethan double-checked their packs, ensuring they had everything they needed. Zanara stood beside him, her glowing skin dimmed to blend in with the shadows. "Ready?" he asked, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "As ready as I will ever be," she replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty ahead. They set off at dawn, moving cautiously through the forest. The path to the military base was treacherous, winding through dense underbrush and rocky terrain. Ethan led the way, using a map he'd found in the cabin to guide them. Zanara followed closely, her senses alert for any sign of danger. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves made them pause. Their hearts pounding in unison. By midday, they reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to open fields dyed with tall grass. In the distance, they could see the silhouette of the military base, its concrete walls crumbling and overgrown with vines. It looked deserted, but appearances could be deceiving. Ethan motioned for Zanara to stay low as they crossed the field, keeping their movement slow and deliberate. As they approached the base, the air grew heavier, tinged with the scent of decay. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen debris, forcing them to climb over piles of rubble to get inside. Once inside, they were met with eerie silence. The interior was dark and damp, the walls lined with peeling paint and broken tiles. Ethan switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, shining the light down a long corridor. Zanara nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the area. "Stay alert," she whispered. "The Vorthik may have been here." They moved carefully, checking each room for signs of usable equipment. Most of the rooms were empty or filled with useless junk, but eventually they stumbled upon what looked like a control room. The consoles were outdated and covered in dust, but some of the machinery appeared intact. Zanara examined the equipment closely, her fingers tracing the buttons and switches. "This might work," she said after a moment, "with some adjustments." Ethan set to work, using his mechanical expertise to repair the damaged components. Zanara assisted him, holding wires in place and handing him tools as needed. Despite the urgency of their task, there was a rhythm to their teamwork, a quiet understanding that allowed them to communicate without words. Hours passed as they worked, the outside world fading into the background. Finally, Ethan leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "All right," he said, flipping a switch. "Let's see if this thing still works." The console hummed to life, its screen flickering before stabilizing. Zanara placed her wrist device onto the scanner, and the machine whirred as it began decoding the data. For a moment, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered, and a loud alarm blared through the base. "What's happening?" Ethan shouted over the noise. "The system, it detected the data," Zanara replied, panic rising in her voice. "It's broadcasting a signal," Ethan cursed under his breath. "That means the Vorthik will know we're here." Zanara nodded. Grimly, "We need to finish this quickly." Working faster than ever, they focused on extracting the information. The alarm continued to wail, echoing through the corridors and drowning out all other sounds. Just as the download completed, the door burst open, and a Vorthik drone lunged into the room, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan grabbed a metal pipe and swung it at the creature, striking it hard enough to knock it back. Zanara unleashed a burst of energy, blinding the drone momentarily. Together, they fought desperately, buying themselves enough time to grab the decoded data and flee the room dot as they ran through the base. Pursued by the relentless Vorthik, Ethan realized something important. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Zinar, for her people, her world, and the future she believed in. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. Ethan and Zanara burst out of the military base, their hearts pounding as they sprinted across the overgrown field. Behind them, the Vorthik drones poured out of the building like a swarm of insects, their mechanical limbs slicing through the air with deadly precision. The alarm had stopped blaring, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the low hum of the creature's engines. "This way!" Ethan shouted, veering sharply. To the left. He led Zanara toward a cluster of trees at the edge of the field, hoping the dense forest would provide some cover. They dove into the underbrush just as one of the drones fired a blast of energy, scorching the ground where they had been standing moments before. Zanara clutched the small data drive tightly in her hand, her glowing skin dimmed to blend in with the shadows. "We cannot stop," she panted, her voice strained. "They will not give up." "I know," Ethan replied, glancing back to gauge the distance between them and the pursuing Vorthik. "Just keep moving." The forest was dark and tangled, the thick canopy blocking out most of the sunlight. It made navigation difficult, but it also worked in their favor, slowing down the larger drones. Ethan pushed forward, using his familiarity with the terrain to guide them through narrow paths and around obstacles. Zanara followed closely, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. After what felt like hours, they reached a shallow ravine and slid down into it, crouching behind a fallen log to catch their breath. Ethan peered over the edge, watching. As the Vorthik spread out in search of them, their red eyes scanned the area methodically, pausing briefly on the ravine before moving on. For now, they were safe, but only for a moment. "We need a plan," Ethan whispered, turning to Zanara. "We can't keep running forever." Zanara nodded, her expression grim. "The data is useless without a way to transmit it. We must find a place to send the signal to disable the hive mind." Ethan frowned. "Where do we even start? This isn't exactly something you can do with a walkie-talkie." Zanara hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing in thought. "There is a broadcast tower nearby, an old one. If we can reach it, I may be able to adapt the equipment to amplify the signal." "A broadcast tower?" Ethan echoed, his mind racing. "That's risky. Those things are usually in wide open areas, easy targets." "It is our only option," Zanara insisted. "If we succeed, we can end this." Ethan sighed, knowing she was right. "All right, but we'll need to move fast and smart." They waited until the Vorthek moved farther away before slipping out of the ravine and continuing their journey. The path to the broadcast tower took them through increasingly treacherous terrain, steep hills, muddy streams, and patches of thorny bush that tore at their clothes. Every step was exhausting, but neither of them dared to slow down. The stakes were too high. As night fell, they found temporary shelter in the hollow trunk of an ancient tree. Ethan built a small fire to keep them warm, its flickering light barely visible through the cracks in the bark. Zanara sat close to him, her body trembling slightly from the cold. Despite everything, there was a quiet intimacy to the moment, a sense of trust that had grown between them over the past few days. "You've done so much for me," Zanara said softly, breaking the silence. "More than I could have hoped for." Ethan shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "I'm just trying to survive, same as you." "No," Zanara countered, her voice firm. "You could have left me. You could have run when the Vorthek came, but you stayed. That means something." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared into the flames, reflecting on how much his life had changed since finding her. Before, survival had been about isolation, keeping himself apart from the world. Now, it was about protecting someone else, about making sure she made it through. Somewhere along the way, he had started to care not just about himself, but about her. "We'll make it," he said finally, meeting her gaze. Together. The next morning, they resumed their trek, the broadcast tower looming larger on the horizon with each passing hour. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a clearing where the structure stood, a tall, skeletal framework of metal and rusted steel. It looked abandoned, its antennas bent and broken, but it was still intact enough to serve their purpose. "Stay low," Ethan warned as they approached. "We don't know if they've already sent scouts here." Zanara nodded, her glowing skin dimming further to avoid detection. They crept closer, scanning the area for signs of danger. The tower was surrounded by thick grass and weeds, making it difficult to see any hidden threats. Ethan motioned for Zanara to wait while he checked the perimeter. After a few tense minutes, he signaled that the coast was clear. Inside the control room at the base of the tower, Zanara set to work, connecting the data drive to the outdated broadcasting equipment. Ethan stood guard at the door, his makeshift weapon a length of rebar at the ready. Every sound outside made him flinch, his nerves stretched taut like wires. "How's it going?" he asked after a while, trying to mask his anxiety. "Slowly," Zanara replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "The system is old, but it should work. I just need time." Time was something they didn't have. Within minutes, the familiar hum of the Vorthek grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of metal against metal. Ethan cursed under his breath. "They're here." Zanara didn't look up, her focus unwavering. "Keep them busy. I am almost done." Ethereal determination filled her voice, leaving no room for argument. Ethan tightened his grip on the rebar and stepped outside, positioning himself between the approaching drones and the control room. There were 3 of them, their jagged forms glinting ominously in the sunlight. He raised his weapon, knowing it wouldn't be enough, but determined to buy Zanara every second he could. The first drone lunged at him, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan ducked, swinging the rebar with all his strength and striking the creature's leg. It stumbled momentarily, giving him just enough time to dodge another attack. The second drone joined the fray, forcing him to retreat toward the tower. Sweat dripped down his face as he fought desperately, his muscles burning with exertion. Inside, Zanara worked frantically, her hands shaking as she adjusted the final settings. The console beeped urgently, signaling that the transmission was ready to begin. She glanced toward the doorway, seeing flashes of movement and hearing the clash of metal. Her heart ached for Ethan, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. Activating the signal, she watched as the data streamed outward, invisible waves spreading across the landscape. Outside, the Vorthek froze mid-attack, their red eyes flickering erratically. One by one, they collapsed, their bodies shutting down as the connection to their hive mind was severed. Ethan staggered back, gasping for breath as he realized what had happened. The threat was gone for now. Zenora emerged from the control room, her glowing skin brightening with relief. "It worked," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The network is disabled." Ethan dropped the rebar, his legs giving. Out beneath him, he sat heavily on the ground, staring at the motionless drones scattered around them. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "You actually did it." But Zenara shook her head, kneeling beside him. "We did it," she corrected gently. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." For a long moment, they simply sat there, letting the weight of their victory sink in. The battle was over, but both knew the war wasn't. There would be more challenges ahead, more dangers to face. Yet, in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of their enemies, they allowed themselves a rare luxury: hope. The victory at the broadcast tower was short-lived. While the Vorthic drones lay motionless, their connection to the hive mind severe, Ethan and Zenara knew they couldn't afford to relax. The network might have been disabled, but it was only a temporary fix. If the central hive mind itself wasn't destroyed, the Vorthic would eventually recover and adapt. They needed a permanent solution and fast. Ethan leaned against the rusted frame of the broadcast tower, catching his breath. His body ached from the fight, and his hands were raw from gripping the rebar so tightly. "What now?" he asked, looking at Zenara. "We can't just sit here." Zenara nodded, her glowing skin dimming slightly, as she thought. "The hive mind is located in their main stronghold," she explained. "It is heavily guarded, but if we can reach it, we can destroy it completely." "Guarded how?" Ethan pressed, dreading the answer. "By more drones, larger ones," Zenara replied, "and possibly something worse. Their leader a hybrid creature that controls them all." Ethan groaned, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "Great. So we're walking into a death trap." "It is dangerous," Zenara admitted. "But it is the only way to ensure they cannot rebuild." "We must try," Ethan sighed, knowing she was right. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. "All right," he said finally. "Where is this stronghold?" Zenara pointed east, toward the horizon, beyond the mountains. "It will take days to get there on foot, and the journey will not be easy." With no time to waste, they gathered what supplies they could salvage from the control room and set off again. The path ahead was rugged and unforgiving, taking them through dense forests, rocky cliffs, and barren plains. Each step brought new challenges: treacherous terrain, unpredictable weather, and the constant fear of encountering surviving Vorthic units. On the second day of their journey, they came across an abandoned town. The buildings were crumbling, their windows shattered and walls covered in ivy. It looked like it hadn't seen human activity in decades. Ethan suggested they search for food or tools, but Zenara hesitated, her glowing eyes scanning the area. Cautiously, "Something feels wrong," she murmured, her voice low. Ethan frowned. "Wrong how?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But we should be careful." They entered the town slowly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. The streets were eerily silent, the only sounds coming from the wind rattling loose boards and scraps of metal. As they moved deeper into the town, Ethan noticed strange markings on some of the buildings, symbols carved into the wood that glowed faintly, similar to the ones etched into Zenara's skin. "What are those?" he asked, pointing to one of the symbols. Zenara examined it closely, her expression darkening. "Vorthic markings," she said grimly. "They have been here." Before Ethan could respond, a low growl echoed through the air. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. From the shadows emerged a group of smaller Vorthic units, their jagged limbs twitching as they locked onto their targets. These weren't full-size drones, they were smaller, faster, and clearly designed for ambush. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Zenara's arm and pulling her toward a nearby building. They ducked inside, barricading the door with whatever furniture they could find. Outside, the creatures began clawing at the walls, their mechanical screeches sending chills down Ethan's spine. Zanara pressed herself against the wall, her glowing skin dimmed to near invisibility. "We cannot!" "Stay here," she whispered urgently. "I know," Ethan replied, scanning the room for another exit. His eyes landed on a broken window at the back of the building. "There," he said, pointing. "We'll go out the window and circle around them." Working quickly, they climbed through the window and slipped into an alleyway behind the building. The Vorthic units were still focused on the front entrance, giving them a brief window of opportunity. They sprinted down the alley, dodging debris and leaping over fallen beams. Behind them, the creatures realized their prey had escaped and gave chase, their movements unnervingly swift. "We need to lose them," Ethan panted, glancing over his shoulder. Zanara nodded, her mind racing. She raised her hand, focusing her energy until a bright flash erupted from her palm. The burst of light blinded the pursuing Vorthic momentarily, causing them to stumble. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ethan and Zanara darted into a narrow passageway between two buildings, squeezing through just as the creatures regained their bearings. For several minutes, they crouched in the shadows, listening as the Vorthic searched for them. Finally, the sounds faded, and they allowed themselves a moment to breathe. "That was too close," Ethan muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Zanara nodded, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "We cannot let our guard down again." As they continued through the town, they discovered signs of recent activity fresh. Tire tracks in the dirt, discarded supplies, and even a campfire that still smoldered. Someone else had been here recently, someone who wasn't Vorthic. Ethan spotted a piece of fabric, snagged on a fence post, and picked it up. It was torn and dirty, but unmistakably part of a military uniform. "Do you think there are other survivors?" he asked, holding up the fabric for Zanara to see. "It is possible," she replied. "Humans often gather in groups when faced with danger." Ethan considered this. If there were other survivors nearby, they might have valuable information or even weapons that could help them reach the Vorthic stronghold. But finding them wouldn't be easy. The town was vast, and the risk of running into more Vorthic units was high. Deciding it was worth the risk, they followed the trail of clues, moving cautiously from building to building. Eventually, they reached a warehouse on the outskirts of the town. The doors were slightly ajar, and faint voices could be heard from inside. Ethan motioned for Zanara to stay back while he crept closer to investigate. Peering through the crack in the door, he saw a group of people huddled together, their faces gaunt and weary. They were armed with makeshift weapons, baseball bats, pipes, and knives, but they looked exhausted, as though they'd been fighting for survival for a long time. One of them, a woman with short brown hair and sharp features, was speaking in a low voice. "They're getting smarter," she said. "Every time we think we've lost them, they find us again. We can't keep running forever." Ethan took a deep breath and pushed the door open slightly. "Hey," he called out softly. "We're not Vorthic." The group turned sharply, weapons raised. The woman stepped forward, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name's Ethan," he replied, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "This is Zanara. We're trying to stop the Vorthic." The woman studied him for a moment before lowering her weapon slightly. "I'm Claire," she said. "And you better explain yourselves quickly if you want to stay alive." Ethan and Zanara stepped fully into the warehouse, and Zanara began explaining their mission. She told them about the hive mind, the stolen data, and their plan to destroy it. At first, the group was skeptical, especially when Zanara demonstrated her glowing abilities. But Claire seemed intrigued, asking questions and piecing together the logic of their strategy. "If what you're saying is true," Claire said finally, "then maybe we can help each other. We've been fighting these things for months, but we don't have the tools to take them down permanently." Ethan nodded. We could use your knowledge of the area and your weapons. Claire hesitated, then extended her hand. All right, let's do this. With Claire and her group joining their odds improved significantly. Together, they mapped out a route to the Vorthix stronghold, planning their approach carefully. Claire shared information about safe zones and areas to avoid, while Ethan and Zanara prepared for the final confrontation. As they set off once more, Ethan felt a renewed sense of determination. They weren't alone anymore. With allies by their side and a clear goal in sight, they stood a real chance of ending the Vorthix threat once and for all. But deep down, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The journey to the Vorthix stronghold was grueling, testing the limits of everyone in the group. With Claire and her team now part of their mission, Ethan and Zanara had more support, but also more responsibility. The path ahead was fraught with danger, and every decision they made could mean the difference between success and failure. They traveled mostly at night, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. During the day, they hid in caves or dense thickets, taking turns keeping watch while others rested. Supplies were running low, and exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them. Still, no one complained. They knew what was at stake. On the third night, they reached the base of the mountains that marked the final stretch of their journey. The terrain was steep and treacherous, with jagged rocks and narrow ledges that made climbing difficult. Claire took the lead, her experience in survival tactics proving invaluable as she guided them through the most perilous sections. Zanara followed closely behind her, her glowing skin dimmed to blend in with the shadows. Ethan brought up the rear, helping those who struggled with the climb. At one point, a member of Claire's group, a young man named Ryan, slipped on a loose rock, nearly falling into the abyss below. Ethan reacted quickly, grabbing his arm and pulling him back on the solid ground. Ryan gasped for breath, his face pale with shock. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice trembling. "Don't mention it," Ethan replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just focus on the next step." By dawn, they reached a plateau halfway up the mountain. From there, they could see the Vorthix stronghold in the distance, a massive structure carved into the side of the tallest peak. Its black surface shimmered faintly, pulsating with an eerie glow. It looked impenetrable, like something out of a nightmare. "That's it," Zanara said quietly, her eyes fixed on the fortress. "The hive mind is inside." Claire studied the stronghold through binoculars, her expression grim. "It's going to be heavily guarded. We'll need a plan." Ethan nodded. "We can't just storm in. We'll need a distraction." Zanara stepped forward, her glowing form brightening slightly. "I will create the distraction," she said firmly. "You must find a way inside while I draw their attention." "No." Ethan protested immediately. "That's too risky." "We stick together. It is the only way," Zanara insisted. "If we all go in at once, they will overwhelm us." "Trust me." The group exchanged uneasy glances. None of them liked the idea of splitting up, but they knew Zanara was right. If anyone could distract the Vorthix, it was her. Reluctantly, they agreed to her plan. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Claire and her team gathered whatever weapons and tools they could scavenge from the surrounding area, fashioning crude explosives and traps. Ethan worked on modifying the remaining equipment they had brought with them, ensuring everything was ready for the assault. Zanara meditated quietly, conserving her energy for the task ahead. As night fell, they moved closer to the stronghold, staying hidden among the rocks. The air grew colder, and the wind howled around them, making it hard to hear anything except its relentless roar. Finally, they reached a ridge overlooking the entrance to the fortress. Below, Vorthix drones patrolled the area, their red eyes scanning for intruders. "This is it," Claire whispered, checking her rifle one last time. "Everyone knows their role?" The group nodded silently, their faces tense with anticipation. Zanara stepped forward, her glowing skin dimming slightly. As she prepared herself, "Be careful," she said softly, looking at Ethan. "And remember, you must destroy the core." I know, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his stomach. We'll get it done. Without another word, Zenara descended the ridge, moving quickly toward the fortress. When she was close enough, she unleashed a burst of energy, creating a blinding flash that lit up the entire area. The Vorthic drones turned toward the source of the disturbance, their mechanical limbs twitching as they converged on her position. Now! Claire shouted, signaling the others to move. Ethan and the group sprinted toward the fortress, using the chaos caused by Zenara's distraction to slip past the distracted drones. They reached the entrance without incident, finding it sealed by a heavy metal door. Claire knelt down, attaching one of their makeshift explosives to the lock. Stand back, she warned, lighting the fuse. The explosion was deafening, sending shards of metal flying in all directions. The door groaned open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Inside, the air was cold and stale, carrying the faint hum of machinery. Ethan led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gloom as they moved deeper into the stronghold. The interior was a labyrinth of twisting hallways and locked doors, each one requiring careful navigation. Along the way, they encountered smaller Vorthic units, forcing them to fight their way through. Claire and her team handled the combat, their weapons proving effective against the creature's weak points. Ethan focused on finding the central chamber, relying on Zenara's earlier descriptions to guide them. Finally, they reached a massive door at the end of a long hallway. It was reinforced with thick steel and etched with glowing symbols similar to the ones on Zenara's skin. This has to be it, Ethan said, examining the mechanism. The hive mind is inside. Claire nodded, stepping forward. Let's get this open. Working together, they managed to pry the door open, revealing a cavernous room filled with pulsating machinery. At the center of the chamber stood a towering structure, a grotesque fusion of organic tissue and advanced technology. It pulsed rhythmically, emitting a low, guttural sound that seemed almost alive. This was the hive mind, the source of the Vorthic's power. There, Ethan said, pointing to a glowing core embedded deep within the structure. That's what we need to destroy. Ryan handed him a small explosive charge, which Ethan carefully placed near the core. As he worked, the ground began to shake, and the walls echoed with the sound of approaching footsteps. The Vorthic had realized what was happening and were closing in fast. Hurry, Claire urged, standing guard at the entrance with her rifle. Raise. Ethan finished setting the charge and activated the timer. Done, he said, backing away quickly. Let's go. They ran back through the corridors, pursued by the relentless Vorthic. Behind them, the fortress began to collapse, the destruction of the hive mind causing the entire structure to destabilize. The group barely made it outside before the stronghold erupted in a massive explosion, sending flames and debris soaring into the sky. Breathing heavily, they watched as the fortress crumbled, the glow of the hive mind fading into darkness. For a moment, there was silence, then cheers broke out among the group. They had done it. The Vorthic threat was over, but Ethan's relief was short-lived. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Zenara. She had promised to meet them here after creating the distraction, but she was nowhere to be seen. Fear gripped his chest as he realized she might not have made it. Zenara, he called out, his voice breaking. Where are you? Then, from the shadows, a faint light appeared. Zenara emerged slowly, her glowing skin dim but still radiant. She was battered and bruised, but alive. Ethan rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. You're okay, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I told you I would be, she replied, smiling faintly despite her exhaustion. Together, they stood watching as the remains of the stronghold burned, the weight of their victory settling over them. The battle was won, but the scars it left behind would linger for all of them. The explosion of the Vorthic stronghold lit up the night sky, its fiery glow casting long shadows across the mountainside. Ethan and Zenara stood together, watching as the fortress crumbled into ruin. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal, but there was an undeniable sense of relief in the group. They had done what seemed impossible. They had destroyed the hive mind and ended the Vortic threat. Claire approached them, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her eyes bright with triumph. "It's over," she said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her tone. "You did it." Ethan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the burning wreckage. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Zanara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle, yet firm. "Sometimes sacrifices are necessary," she said softly. "We gave everything we could to stop them. That is enough." Her words carried weight, but they didn't ease the ache in Ethan's chest. He had seen too much destruction, too much loss. And now that the immediate danger was gone, he couldn't help but think about what came next for all of them. As dawn broke over the horizon, the group began their descent from the mountains. The journey back was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. Claire and her team talked quietly among themselves, planning how they would rebuild their lives after months of fighting for survival. Ethan walked beside Zanara, who moved slowly, her body still recovering from the injuries she had sustained during her distraction. "You saved us," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "All of us. I don't know how to thank you." Zanara shook her head, her glowing skin dimming slightly. "I only did what was necessary. You saved me first, remember." Ethan smiled faintly, recalling the day he had found her injured and alone in the forest. So much had changed since then. He wasn't the same man who had lived in solitude, content to avoid the world. Now he felt connected to Zanara, to Claire and her group, and even to the planet itself. He had fought not just for himself, but for something bigger. When they reached the base of the mountains, Claire announced that her group would stay behind to scout the area and ensure no surviving Vortic units remained. She offered Ethan and Zanara a place with them, promising safety and support. But Ethan hesitated. His cabin in the woods was far away, isolated from the chaos of the world, and he knew Zanara might need time to recover fully. "We'll head back to my place," he said finally, looking at Zanara for confirmation. "If that's okay with you." She nodded, her expression softening. "Your home has been a refuge for me before. I would like to see it again." With heavy hearts, they said their goodbyes to Claire and her team. The parting was bittersweet. They had fought side by side, forged bonds through shared danger, and now they were going their separate ways. But there was hope in their farewells, a belief that life could start anew, even after such devastation. The walk back to Ethan's cabin took several days, the path familiar yet different somehow. The forest felt quieter now, less menacing without the constant threat of the Vortic. Ethan pointed out landmarks along the way, the rocky outcrop where they had hidden, the stream where they had rested, and Zanara listened intently, committing each detail to memory. When they finally arrived at the cabin, it looked exactly as Ethan had left it, though the windows were streaked with dust and leaves littered the porch. Inside, the air was stale, but the firewood he had stacked near the hearth was dry and ready to burn. Ethan set about making the space livable again, lighting a fire and unpacking the few supplies they had brought with them. Zanara helped where she could, her movements slower than usual but deliberate. That evening, they sat by the fire, the warmth chasing away the chill of the night. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to relax, if only for a moment. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. Zanara tilted her head, considering the question. "I do not know," she admitted. "My mission here is complete, but I cannot return to my homeworld. Not yet." "Why not?" Ethan pressed gently. "The damage the Vortic caused, it will take time to heal," she explained. "And I'm not sure I belong there anymore. Too much has changed." Ethan nodded, his heart aching for her. "You're welcome to stay here, you know. As long as you need." Zanara smiled, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "Thank you, Ethan. Your kindness means more to me than I can say." Days turned into weeks, and life at the cabin settled into a rhythm. Ethan repaired cars for nearby townsfolk, bringing in enough money to keep them supplied. Zanara spent her time exploring the forest, learning about Earth and its creatures. She marveled at things Ethan had always taken for granted: the songs of birds, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the simple beauty of a clear night sky. One evening, as they sat outside watching the stars, Zanara spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what comes next? After everything we've been through?" Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I try not to think too far ahead. Life feels fragile now, like anything could change in an instant." "I feel the same," Zanara said. "But maybe that is a good thing. It reminds us to appreciate what we have." They sat in silence for a while, the vastness of the universe stretching above them. Ethan realized how much Zanara had taught him, not just about courage or resilience, but about connection. Despite their differences, they had found common ground, built trust, and created something meaningful together. Eventually, Zanara stood, brushing off her hands. "Thank you, Ethan," she said simply, "for everything." He smiled, standing as well. "Anytime." As they headed back inside, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The future was uncertain, but for now, they were safe. Together, they had faced monsters both external and within and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side.